climate change is one of the single greatest threat to our existence. And in this literature review, we would like to say that higher education is the key to creating relevant interventions for climate justice and survival. So today, I will give you a snapshot of the University of the South Pacific's Participatory Action Research Group's literature review on climate change in higher education in Fiji. Oh, it's not moving. Sorry. It doesn't seem to want to move. So, this literature review was done to guide us in creating relevant interventions for our participatory action research site. The literature reviewed is from a collection of work published in Climate Change Global Reports, Fiji National Plans, Policies and Act, and the three Fiji Climate U collaborating universities, the University of Fiji, Fiji National University, and the University of the South Pacific Strategic Plans and Annual Reports. According to the International Panel of Climate Change's 2018 special report, the global temperature is forecasted to increase to reach 1.5 degrees between 2030 and 2052. That's if anthropogenic activities continue. That gives us a time of around 7 years to try and control human activities so that we do not reach a state where we cannot grow our food or store water because it is too hot to be able to do these things. Small island developing states like Kiribati, Tuvalu, and Fiji are at the forefront of the impacts of climate change and have developed a wide range of interventions, including tailoring traditional practices with conventional methods to address the impacts of climate change on the environment and livelihoods. To ensure these practices are effective, small island developing states have created policies and frameworks to guide their responses. In Fiji, for example, the Fiji government developed the 5 and 20-year National Development Plan that guides the development and implementation of other national policies like the Fiji National Climate Change Policy of NCC in short. These plans and policies aim to accelerate Fiji's progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, Fiji's first climate change policy was rolled out in 2012. This policy uses a sectoral approach where each relevant sector has a responsibility to address their priority areas. The priority areas in the 2012 Fiji National Climate Change Policy clearly highlighted the role of higher education in awareness, education, training, climate data collection, storage, and sharing, more so in international and Pacific region partnership. In 2014, this policy was revised as the climate change needs have evolved. Hence, the second FNCC of Fiji National Climate Change Policy was rolled out in 2018. This new FNCC used the weaving approach to connect the actions and priorities of government, the private sector, civil society, development partners, and academia, bringing these strands together to strengthen the strategic approach to manage climate risks. In 2021, the launching of the Fiji Climate Change Act substantiated the implementation of the FNCC policy, and Fiji's commitment to protecting its environment. However, the 2018 Fiji National Climate Change Policy was not clear on the role of academia. But to support the Fiji government in its aspirations, higher education institutions in Fiji developed their plans and activities in alignment to the Fiji National Plans, Policies, and Act. Let's take a look at the three Climate U collaborating universities. Sorry, oh, why does it keep doing this? Sorry. Let's take a look at the three Climate U collaborating universities climate agenda. According to the University of Fiji's 2017 annual report, the institution has included food security, climate change, and renewable energy as their priority areas. The institution is also a host to the Center of Renewable Energy and Center for Climate Change, Energy, Environment, and Sustainable Development, funded by the European Union. The Fiji National University, a Fiji government-owned institution, on the other hand, has only included climate change as one of its research topic areas in its postgraduate program, specifically Masters in Climate Resilience and Mitigation. The University of the South Pacific, a regional university owned by 12 small Pacific Island countries, has been heavily involved in research, consultation, and the teaching of climate change. According to the USP 2018 annual report, one of the USP's strategic research themes is ocean, land, and climate. Funding is provided for research in this area. As such, staff and students are encouraged to conduct research and publish about climate change in the Pacific. In addition, USP hosts the Pacific Center for Environment and Sustainable Development that teaches and researches specifically on climate change related topics and issues. However, at the PACE-SD, or the Pacific Center for Environment and Sustainable Development, it teaches only postgrad courses and develops climate change education curriculum through the Pacific TVET for technical and vocational trainees. Of the three universities, it can be seen that bulk of the work on climate change is done by the USP, where less is done at the FNU and the University of Fiji. One of the reasons could be the availability of fund, as well as the capacity in the three different universities. As University of Fiji is a private institution, and FNU or Fiji National University is a Fiji-owned or national university, and the USP, a regional university, it receives more funding compared to the other two universities. So USP's work does not only concentrate on teaching and research, but also involves consultation and work with technical and vocational institutions. The literature for these three universities is silent on the percentage of the content of climate change education derived in each of their programs and courses. Furthermore, it does not highlight other informal activities that the universities may have developed and carried out. More so, it is silent on the university's climate activities in the communities. It is important to find this information out so that gaps in the programs and activities can be identified and improved for future program delivery and Fiji's preparedness for climate change. The influence of climate change on people's livelihood is real, and Fijians need to be prepared to adapt to the changes it brings. However, people cannot be prepared if they are not equipped with relevant knowledge and skills. Therefore, it is crucial that all levels of education include climate change in their learning and teaching content. However, according to the literature reviewed, the current Fiji National Climate Change Policy is silent about the inclusion of climate change in the curriculum. This is worrying, as this will dictate the content of the Fiji National Curriculum. However, it is a relief to find that tertiary institutions are including climate change in their teaching and research areas. Nevertheless, it is hoped that this literature review will guide the 3 Climate U collaborating higher education institutions in Fiji in addressing the gaps highlighted in this review in their participatory research group activities to ensure Fijians' climate change preparedness and climate risk reduction. Vinakavakalevu.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosie, for that background, and thank you for giving us insight into these processes and kind of how the literature review has brought forth all of these different points and ideas that are highlighted then again in the report that we're very excited is. Yeah, it was just finalized last night and put onto our website today, so it's very exciting that it's available now for out in the world. So we're going to have a little bit of time for Michael to respond, and then we can go on to the discussion. So the floor is yours, Michael. If you could unmute yourself. Sorry.
Back with you. Thank you, Rosie. Pleasure to be here doing this with you. And firstly, really, can I thank Rosie, Dr. Lagi, friend and colleague, for producing what I think is an original, clear, accessible, and as Lauren says, a very timely study. And I think this will be valuable material within Fiji and the Pacific, for other small island developing states worldwide, and also for the ongoing work of the Climate U project itself. I found it a very accessible read, so please pass that message.
Michael, I've lost Michael.
Thanks.
There we go. Hi, Michael.
First of all, read. Okay. I'll carry on. Can people hear?
Sorry, Michael. I believe it's choppy. We can sort of hear you, but your image is frozen.
I'm voice, but can't quite hear what is being said.
Ah, okay. I think it might have been a connection lag or something going on. I think I can see you clearly now. I can hear you.
Okay.
So sorry. Can you
start again?
Yes, I think if you could go back a few minutes, that was it just started kind of getting weird. Yeah. Thank you.
I wasn't sure what was happening there, but something was going on.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
I'd said thank you to Rosie and the team for a very clear, accessible and original report. So that's really the spirit of the first words I was saying. And what I'm going to do now is respond by thinking about the top takeaways really that I have from reading the report. What would I say to help everyone else in the audience and readers worldwide to focus on some of the core themes that seem to emerge in the process of doing this report, as well as in the findings themselves. And I think the first thing I want to say is, because we're dealing with small island developing states and the Pacific or Oceania in particular, it's pleasing to see that the report does recognise that higher education in Fiji, really within the region, has for quite some time been engaged with climate change and sustainable development, at least those two interrelated concepts and challenges that our global world is facing. Fiji is not behind the wave, well, that's a good metaphor to use, but has been really engaged for quite some time. This in itself demonstrates how Fiji is at, and this is the phrase that we've used in much of the research I've been involved in for some decades, is at the sharp end of climate change. And in some respects, of course, there are gaps, and that's part of the importance of the literature review. Of course, there are gaps, but to some extent, Fiji and higher education in the Pacific has been pioneering some important responses to climate change and the challenges of sustainable development in our global planet. The third point, takeaway point, that stands out for me in reading well, it's a working paper, it's titled a working paper, demonstrates or clarifies what more can be done within Fiji and in higher education throughout the Pacific. So it's a helpful report, a helpful document, in that it does identify gaps, it does begin to point to priorities and possible ways forward. So it's a useful document in the way it's been constructed. The fourth core takeaway for me, it is a very context-sensitive benchmark for others working on climate change and higher education in the Pacific. It isn't a document that just repeats or promotes global agendas. It does engage with global agendas, but it does that in some critical ways, and it is a more context-sensitive type of working paper and report that, for me, makes it much more relevant and appropriate, reflecting voices and concerns and priorities within this important but often marginalized region, marginalized in terms of the international literature and debate. Fifth takeaway point, I think this is really important. It's a working paper that draws attention to the relationships and the intersections between global knowledge on the one hand on climate change and local contextual realities. And this is the sort of new point I'm adding here, the nature, place and potential of indigenous knowledges and indigenous approaches to research, for that matter. Sixth takeaway, I was pleased, obviously, given the work that I've been doing in different small islands, developing states around the globe, but the working paper connects to the experience of other small island developing states and recognizes how the international community can learn from that collective experience, from other small island developing states, but also from the Pacific, Oceania, Fiji in particular. And sort of nuancing that is a point that stands out really quite firmly in some sections of the paper, and that is how greater attention could be given to learning from other island experiences and sharing knowledge and experience, and not only within the Pacific, but across regions, different small states worldwide. But I would add a very important sort of thread to that. It does it in a sensitive way, not promoting copying and direct borrowing of ideas or policies or interventions, but sensibly, more realistically saying, let's be aware of what is happening elsewhere. Let's learn from that experience. Let it inform our own judgments from that collective sharing. In other words, a learning process, not a copying or simplistic policy borrowing process. 7, the paper documents key climate-related challenges in the Pacific, with specific examples being given. And that probably gives it a little bit of power in the sense that it connects with people's lived experiences and the reader's imagination relating to the powerful potential impacts of climate change. In the Pacific, in particular, sea level rise is one of the major challenges. And 2 things that stand out in my mind, just given as examples of the effects of sea level rise, are the effect in Tuvalu, I think it is, on burial sites, where sea level rise causes those burial sites to be seriously disturbed. A second one that sort of relates way back into Pacific history, well, not way back, but into modern Pacific history, is the danger of sea level rise promoting the spread of nuclear contamination and waste from post-World War impact and trials and so on, nuclear trials within the Pacific. An 8th takeaway point, important one this, important in many other ways than just the discussions about climate change. This is a document that does delve into the local literature written by Pacific researchers and Pacific scholars related to climate change, but also to education and higher education, sustainable development, and so on. So we've got a resource here that does provide a bibliography or a set of references that are that well represent Pacific research, local research, indigenous knowledge, work that is less well known outside the Pacific region itself. And in doing that, I think that's a significant contribution of this working paper in itself. And 2 final points, just wrapping things together, I guess, and that's what the working paper does do well. Paper does review the emergence of climate change policy within Fiji, the history of that, as Rosie's presentation itself sort of documented in part, and in the region. And it highlights that significant history of creative initiatives that have been taken within higher education. So again, there is a positive element to the story, to the review, but also concluding with clearly identifying emergent priorities for future action in higher education and beyond higher education in this important region. A region that, yep, the Pacific Rim, if we want to think of it like that, will be of increased global importance, I'm sure, in coming years and decades. So that's my top 10 takeaways, I guess, helping to just point readers to some of the core themes that I think are important in this working paper, a valuable working paper. And I guess my 10 minutes, I'm rounding off there, but maybe I could throw, I have a few questions that I can be happy to introduce in the debate later, but I could end with one that builds on my last point of clearly identifying emergent priorities for future action. I won't put Rosie too much on the spot, but the question that I think is worth us discussing in the next part of this session would be, well, let me say it to Rosie, but you needn't answer immediately, Rosie. What would you set as the first climate change priority for higher education going into the next phase of time and development? Lauren, I'm happy to stop there for the moment.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael, for that. Those really powerful points. I found it very easy to follow in the way you've organized, those points. So I've read the literature review, and I think I should go back and revisit it with those points in mind. That was really helpful. There was a great question as well. I think we have a couple of things in the Q&A, but I would absolutely encourage our attendees, if you have any questions, thoughts, reflections, comments, please do pop them in the chat, or if it's a specific question in the Q&A, and we'll start answering them as we go. There's a question there, but I think it would be nice kind of to link everything. Rosie, if you want to come in and maybe start thinking about that question that Michael posed.
Thank you, Professor Michael. So yes, I think there are a couple of things that I think are urgent, but one of the things that I think that higher education can address. Now, from, as I mentioned in my presentation, the literature review guided us as a group in creating the intervention strategy that we will provide to the participatory action site that we are going to work with. So one of the things that we found in our work with communities in Fiji is the knowledge gap, the climate change knowledge gap, and the difference in perception in relation to climate change. With our communities and the children in primary school, from the research that we did, we found that their perception of climate change is influenced largely from their daily experiences and cultural knowledge and practices, despite the fact that children in primary schools have been taught about climate change. So for us, we make the conclusion that probably the teachers haven't, effectively taught these students about the conventional knowledge on climate change. So when children were interviewed and asked, their perception was more towards cultural than what is taught in school. So that is something that we think is urgent, climate literacy, because we really need our people to be to know what climate change is. They experience it, they know climate change as they experience it, but really they do not know how they are contributing to climate change, though they also know how to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change that they're experiencing using cultural practices and knowledge. But there is a gap in informing our people how they are related and how they can use their prior knowledge to understand climate change. So this, again, we feel is one of the roles that higher education can take on, is specifically for teacher training institutions, where they prepare teachers with this information, as well as preparing them with the right pedagogies to use, so that their teaching is effective, as well as the weaving of cultural knowledge and practices and conventional knowledge of climate change in the curriculum, because currently the Fiji national curriculum talks about climate change more in the upper primary, but not the traditional knowledge and practices which students are familiar with.
Thank you, Rosie. Michael, did you have any response to the question, or should I go on to the? Oh, sorry, Michael, you're muted.
Sorry, go on there. I'm fine for the moment.
Okay, so Rosie, I'm going to bring in a question from Chris, who asks around strategy. So the question is, are strategies like adaptation, mitigation, and resilience building really addressing effects? And in that sense, are pragmatic actions within any strategy? Perhaps decolonization might be addressed as a causal factor. That's kind of the end of the question. So do you have any comments in response to that?
Okay. In the three higher education institutions that we looked at in the literature review, they teach about adaptation and mitigation, as well as disaster risk reduction. However, we feel that it's more the knowledge is focused on higher education students. It doesn't trickle down to the communities where we have the majority of the people, and members of the communities need to be prepared as well. Most of our graduates, they go to towns and cities to work, but don't go back to the communities, only probably during, a cultural event or, a family function. So these information that's discussed in higher education institutions, doesn't really effectively affect change in the communities. However, it's not in the literature review, but I mentioned how the small island developing states are looking at weaving cultural as well as conventional strategies to mitigate and also adapt to the changes brought about by climate change. And for me, looking at the work of that's held here in Fiji, for example, tree planting, the Fiji government aims to plant about 30 million trees, by 2050. And it's not just there as an aim, but they're really working towards it with the Ministry of Forestry, having marine protected areas, land and marine managed, locally managed areas, to protect our oceans and our marine resources, which most of our people rely on as sources of food and also a source of income. So with the work integrated together, it's doing, it's affecting, it's bringing about some changes, but we feel more can be done.
Thanks, Rosie. And I guess just that last part of the question about what do you think, maybe this is a very, very broad question, but I think Chris raises it around kind of processes of decolonization within these things.
And I think it's working because slowly we are, as you can see in the second climate change policy, we're beginning to weave, and weaving is a traditional process. So because of the belief that it'll strengthen the different sectors, including communities, in their preparation towards what climate change is to bring to us.
Thank you. So I just want to remind all of our attendees, if you'd like to add a question, you can pop it in the Q&A. Alternatively, you can use the raise hand function in the Zoom, and we can turn on mic and video for anyone who'd like to jump in with a question. I think we might have someone jumping in.
But Lorena, sorry if I can just add, it
my
will be
internet
good.
just lost a few sections.
Oops. I think we had, is that Tristan?
Professor Crossley.
No, it was Michael trying to come in there.
Oh, so sorry.
I was saying that I lost a little bit of the discussion there.
Oh, perhaps I think Professor Crossley's having a, oh, maybe he's coming back. There we go. Sorry, Rosie.
So, me too, sorry for anything there, but I'm back with you and kept losing you for a moment.
Okay. Did you have a comment, Michael?
I'm not sure where Rosie ended the answer to the question from Chris, but I could add something to that if that's timely. Yeah.
Of course, yes.
It was the point about the decolonization process and ideas and perspectives. There's probably a yes in here, Chris, but first of all, from all the work I've done in the Pacific over many decades actually, because I used to work at the University of Papua New Guinea back in the 1980s. The Pacific, it's not so widely known outside the region, has been a pioneer in work on decolonization in education. And some good references are also in the working paper here to some of that work by Professor Konai Tharman, for instance, a Tongan poet and writer, and I think was the first ever full professor at the University of the South Pacific. Konai's work is influential within this paper, but she's written more about education than climate change, and her work, without always using the label decolonization, has been at the forefront of decolonization critiques and literatures, and arguing for Pacific cultures, voices, language, concepts, and so on to be more powerfully used in global debates and in articulating local responses from Oceania, from Pacific communities. And that's why one of the points I made in my 10 points, really, in terms of takeaway ideas, is the intersections between global policies, ideas, and prescriptions, and even dominating ideas, the intersections between those and local realities and Pacific cultures and arguments. And that means decolonization arguments and challenges to those global models is hugely important, is picked up within this report. But I think Chris's point is helpful, because it could be that more of that from the higher education and climate change point of view could be one of the priorities for next steps.
Yes.
I'm saying a lot there, but maybe that's enough.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael, for that contribution. I think yeah, it's helpful to emphasize both what's in the report, but also Rosie, it's building on exactly what you were talking about. Very interested in kind of conversations around decolonization, so it's great to hear that. We have a question from.
I'll just add that Rosie, of course, is one of the leading figures in the Pacific writing about indigenous knowledge relating to climate change. So everything I just said there really is supporting more of what Rosie does, rather than saying it's not saying it's not being done. It's just more of that, and probably more embedded in higher education and then through into schooling as well. Is part of the decolonization push.
Yes.
And I think that leads on to answer Kate's question,
yes,
in relation to higher education research and teacher training institutions. That's one thing that's also missing, as I mentioned, in the Fiji National Curriculum Framework itself. It does not include traditional knowledge of climate change, though it talks about education for sustainable development. But it's important that it's clear in the outset for framework, because the framework will guide the curriculum and the syllabi, and that's where it gives opportunity for teacher training institutions to work with the ministries of education on on the curriculum for both teacher training institution curriculum as well as the national curriculum. And for the University of the South Pacific, because it's a regional institution, it does not only work with the Fiji's Ministry of Education, but the other 11 member countries as well.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for the question, Kate. Do we have any other questions, thoughts, comments? Again, if anyone does want to speak, if you can raise your hand and we can turn on people's mics. Actually, great. We have a question from Carrie around, she's asking both traditional knowledge, quotes, in quotes, traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge are used. Are they the same?
Yes, in my presentation, they're used interchangeably. They mean the same thing, but I know in certain areas it may mean different things. But in the context that I'm speaking from, it means the same thing. Traditional and indigenous. Traditional in the sense that the knowledge is from the indigenous people, and the indigenous people are owners of the knowledge that I'm referring to in relation to climate change.
Rosie, you might want to just, in relation to that question, just mention a word about the video that we collectively made with colleagues in the Indian Ocean and the Caribbean last year. Video that we submitted collectively to COP26 with the support of the Cabot Institute here at the University of Bristol, Institute for the Environment. Because in that, your Tuvalu bit I'm sort of pointing to, the main focus there was to capture the voices of Pacific peoples and cultures that would not have been at Glasgow. Sorry, let me pass it back to you now. Just say a little bit more about that, because I think that's also a partial contribution to the last question.
Yes, and thank you. That was also one of the activities that contributed to the university's ranking. The work that was done in Tuvalu. Actually, the video captures the indigenous people of Tuvaluans' voice in relation to their traditional knowledge of weather forecasting. Using natural indicators, local indicators, to be able to forecast any approaching weather, as well as the indicator. As they prepare, they also prepare for what they're going to eat during as well as after this weather. For example, cyclone, the use of frigate birds, how they fly, how low they fly, which direction they are flying, indicates an approaching cyclone. The sound of the waves on the reef, the color of the rock on the reef, indicates a tidal wave, and things like that. And those are also some of the things that we are trying to do as we work with the communities in our participatory action research. We collect those knowledge and document them in videos, as well as big books for children, so that the future generation can have access to it. Yes, and there are many other things that that these big books and resources will contribute to, like, for example, literacy. Literacy is one of the biggest issues here in Fiji, as well as in the region. So developing books from the elder stories and the children's stories, and sharing it back to them and storing them for future use, it's something that that schools can use, not only to help them in literacy, but also prepare them, and ensure the continuity of their knowledge and culture.
And that video was also powerful in trying, what Rosie and team were trying to do was to get the voices of ordinary people, the grassroots, the fishermen, the ladies in the villages, and other local community members into the debate in a place like Glasgow for COP26. But how far we're ever successful in doing those things, when you think about who the voices and the speakers are that you see on the media today.
And that was one of the things that that I wanted to also mention, Lorena, is when we work with the communities, we learn from them. But those things that we learn from them, it should not just be something we learn and publish, but it should help transform our not only perception, but our practices in higher education institutions. And I think if that happens, then we'll really begin to decolonize the curriculum of higher education institutions, and then trickle down to the national curriculum.
Yes, and it's such an ongoing thing, isn't it? I mean, it's not a static. We can't say now we've decolonized. Now we've. I think it's that process that it's so interesting to kind of see, but it's also the challenges shift and change, and the barriers and everything. And yeah, I'm glad that Michael mentioned COP26. Is there any reflection? Maybe do you see, I guess, a year away from making that video and that process? Is there anything, I guess, in terms of COP27 that has come up in your research or in your kind of research groups or discussions? Sorry, that was a random question I just thought about because it's so relevant right now. It's going on as we speak.
While Rosie thinks of an answer to that specific question, the most obvious thing that springs to my mind is we could send that same video to COP27 and just change the number. And all the same arguments are as strong as they ever were then. And I'm hearing people saying the same things this time round. But yeah, Rosie.
For Fiji's our activity for COP, well, the video that was shown in COP 26, I think it was shown in two places. One was with the ESRG, and as well as the Climate U. And if we, it's now on YouTube. And if you have a chance to go into YouTube, you will see that the views have increased. I think the last time I checked, we have 449 views on that link. And I think slowly we are spreading the news that and the knowledge that Professor Thaman started. Actually, Professor Thaman was also my supervisor, and we're glad that we were able to share this our people's voice in Glasgow, and also this year, one of our PAR member, Felipe, is in Egypt right now. So he will be telling our stories in Egypt, though not funded by Climate U, but he is our ambassador there. He's taken the students to Egypt for the COP27, and just to answer.
Yes, we have a couple of questions. So
yes,
sorry, Donna. I hope maybe one of my colleagues can pop in the link, or we can definitely find it and share it in the chat, I hope.
okay.
Yeah, Rosie, did you want to look at Ilsa's question?
Yes, from my experience with policy in Fiji, the first climate change policy, we were involved in its development and implementation as well. As you know, you can see in my presentation, the first policy clearly outlines the role of education, not only early childhood, primary and secondary, but also higher education in climate change. However, the second policy, we were not involved in its development, and so we noticed that you know, it doesn't clearly identify or spell out the role of higher education institution, let alone ECE, primary and secondary. And I think one of the reasons is, you know, because we were not involved in the discussion leading up to the creation of the policy. But yes, it is very important that that we participate in this, so that, you know, we can help the government, the policymakers, you know, in creating very important policies as such, and linking research, the outcome of research into creating such, you know, crucial documents and policies too.
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you for those questions. Again, if anyone would like to ask their question live, so using microphone, just do pop the little raise hand function, and we can turn on the microphone. Does anyone have any other
just
questions?
mention a book that
Yep.
I've just discovered.
Of course.
I hadn't been aware of this book. It's Education and Climate Change, The Role of Universities, edited by Fernando Reimers. Don't know if it's not in the references for the working paper, but it's something that could be there, as it were. But one line that I found really right on target for this discussion and for Climate U is a quotation from page 30 in this book, 2021, published by Springer, 2021, Education and Climate Change, The Role of Universities, Fernando Reimers edited. Universities, the book proposes, universities should become the next leaders, or could become the next leaders in climate change, because they are better at designing and supporting the implementation of context-specific climate change education strategies in particular localities. I think that's a very useful quotation. And for me, it also engages not only with my own work on policy transfer, critiquing simplistic policy transfer, but also the decolonial challenges, where we need more voices from the Pacific, more local voices, more diverse voices, even within the Pacific itself, and to be listened to. That's the problem, getting their ideas listened to and heard, and influencing policy responses that might be more context sensitive and more context specific and more relevant for the places where the problem is being addressed, rather than some global top-down one-size-fits-all agenda that is driven by powerful voices and agencies.
Yes, Rosie, are you still with us? Just checking.
Yes, Lorena.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I lost your video.
Yes, she's gone from me too.
Don't worry, I'm here.
The video we talked about earlier, and I noticed someone's asking, could it be the
Yes,
reference
I'm
to
trying
that be
to
put
find
online?
the link. That's
Yeah,
why.
one of us will
Oh,
get it
brilliant.
there. But an unintended plan for that video, it's now well over 500 views on YouTube, Rosie, but is that it's being used in, and I've got a whole list of different universities worldwide where they're using it as a teaching resource. And we never saw it that way. But if, of course, it's just a 15-minute snapshot with voices from the Caribbean, from the Indian Ocean, and from the South Pacific, from Oceania. But yeah, it's a useful teaching resource should anybody see the video and not realize, hey, I could use that in higher education. Rosie, you're back.
You're back.
Yes.
So we have a couple more questions, Rosie. Chris is asking, from a Pacific perspective, how do the forces of orthodoxy that hold different and often dominant views to climate activists oppose the climate justice reasoning? So good, again, tying into decolonization and all of these processes, but also around the role of climate justice.
Well, what shall I say? Well, I mentioned earlier how I see changes, slowly happening in Fiji in regards to their activities, climate activities. So they're beginning to now use, traditional strategies to adapt, and also where they can mitigate climate change. So, but as I mentioned, the biggest issue that I have is this is not happening in the communities. It's happening in government ministries and in higher education institutions, but I'm hoping that someday, it'll happen across the whole nation, as well as the other region, small island developing states, and where climate justice prevails.
Thank you. So we have a question from Alipio around asking about what's the interaction in climate change education and environmental education, or education for sustainable development. Are there differences among them?
Okay, so when climate change was introduced into the curriculum, well, that was during our days when we were in high school. It was, known as global warming. And then, we like to say, that climate change is more a sexier term. However, I mean, jokes aside. So, and then from then we went on to to environment education. So the focus was only on environment and the impacts of other things, pollution and stuff like that on the environment, not really focusing on climate change and what climate change is and how does it affect the environment, and how do we contribute to climate change, and what are some of the things that we can do to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So recently, it has shifted to climate change. But before that came education for sustainable development. Right? And only recently that the term climate change is beginning to, to be visible in the national curriculum and also higher education programs. So I think it's how the different terms were approached and used really is one of the factors that people are not seriously seeing climate change as one of the greatest threats to, specifically the small island development states' existence, because we are the ones who are at the brunt of all the the impacts of sea level rise, as we depend on the ocean as well as our land for our livelihood.
Staff at the University of the South Pacific, in my understanding, made pretty significant contributions to the literature on education for sustainable development. And you can see that in the literature that's quoted in this working paper, particularly in that decade of education for sustainable development, which was 2005 to 15, I think. And the interesting thing for me on looking at that and just reflecting on it is that I feel that many writers and researchers within Pacific communities felt that sustainable development was what they regard themselves as being great at. It's built into Vanua, the Pacific cultures, Pacific concepts as a way of living. So the great thing about that contribution is I don't feel it was the external world, the international agendas that were sort of generating that in the Pacific. It should be seen as the other way around. The Pacific was saying, this is our territory, guys. We've been doing this forever. This is still built in our traditional ways now. It's time the international community learned more from us. And that, to me, again, is one of the more powerful things that the working paper is connecting to, and for me should connect to. It's international communities, agencies, agendas, workers listening to the views from different cultures within the Pacific, in this case, the Fijian context. And education for sustainable development is one good area for that. Tell us what Vanua means, Rosie, so it's not me speaking that.
Well, Vanua from the indigenous Fijian perspective does not just mean land, because sometimes it's mistaken to be meaning the physical land, but instead it involves, it means the land, the sea or the oceans, the sky, people, and our relationship with this, both living as well as non-living things in these spaces. Included in this definition of Vanua is the concept of the spirit that gives people wisdom so that they can use their traditional knowledge and skills effectively for their survival. Yeah.
Why aren't you in Egypt, Rosie? You should be saying that there.
Oh.
Well said.
Well said. So, I see, Rosie, I think you've popped the link.
That's the link for the.
I'll pop it in the general chat because that's in the Q&A. We have a question then from Dr. Machiri around scaling. So he says the work with young children is fascinating, could form a great platform to creating that long-lasting understanding. Have you and or your colleagues considered how this could be scaled up?
Yes. So with the books that we are working on and the videos, for the books, for example, they are published in different levels, at different age groups. So So we are hoping that, you know, these could be resources for not only the primary and the upper primary, but also some of them to be used in high school. Now, one of the issues, as I mentioned earlier, that we have is literacy. We have students, 16, 18-year-old students who are in high school who can't read. So the big books that we are publishing are in vernacular and translated into the other languages, the other national languages. So we would like to, you know, start them off by developing their vernacular skills before we can use this to transition into learning English. Because English is the language of instruction in schools and is also the one of the national languages. So yes, so definitely we are looking at transitioning it into high school, and we are talking with the ministry of not only in Fiji. 2 days ago, I had the Minister for Education from Tuvalu who are here. And I was also discussing with him how we've published 30 big books for Tuvalu, and we'll be launching them at the end of this year, together with the books we've got here in Fiji. So the books are written by the people, by the children and the elders in the communities, and we're giving them back to them and any other country that may want to purchase the books. Yeah,
that's fascinating. So we have another kind of reflections and questions from Chris, who's touching on, I guess, shifting a little bit to economies and dependent, you know, kind of Fiji, I guess, more broadly, and how this is feeding into so-called development. He is kind of mentioning around policies that try to prevent countries regarded as developing from producing their own food. In what ways is Fiji diversifying its economy? And again, maybe in relation and thinking in relation to displacement, migration, and what this means, I guess, for education as well.
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, two of the practices that's driven by the government is the replanting of trees. Not only trees, any trees, but native trees in communities, as well as the use of marine protected area and locally land management and marine managed areas. Now, the reason these practices are traditional practices. And you know, we call it in Fijian Bonua Sovi, or where the land and the ocean is temporarily closed for a certain time to allow for the regrowth of resources. And the term Sovi not just talks about, it means Sau. Sau meaning prosperity, Sau meaning power. So all this, you know, being brought back to the ocean as well as the land as a provider of food and life. So these are two practices that the Fiji government, you know, have written policies on and are implementing currently in Fiji for the restoration of not only our resources, but specifically food, because it's something, but, you know, we hope that, well, first we are trying to maintain our food sources so that our people can have enough to have, then probably later on think about how we can export them. But currently the focus is on restoring our food sources and our environment. Yeah.
Thank you, Rosie.
So the sugar, yeah, the sugar industry is dying slowly. Here in Fiji, they're shutting down mills in different areas. So I hope that they will replace sugarcane with other native trees, and yeah, that will help restore the minerals and land resources, as well as ocean resources, because they are related, terrestrial as well as the marine resources. Yeah.
I guess to me, this raises kind of a thought, and I know this is more of I guess the global goals, and it's hard to then lose. It's helpful to focus, I guess, on a particular context to think of those goals. So like the SDGs that talk about, yes, food and safety and climate change, but also education and gender and all of these things, I think seeing these things as interrelated. Yeah, I guess maybe in your literature reviews, particularly around the policies, do you see that being tied in together? Do you think those connections, you talked about weaving, we've writing a paper on this right now as well. Do you see kind of that potential to strengthen the interconnectedness, or do you still see some of the challenges there?
Yes, I think that's something that Fiji is trying to do, to try and address those things in the policies. And I think what Fiji needs to do is to make it more visible, because some of the languages, the gender language, the traditional knowledge language is still not visible, but, it's there. And I just hope it's not just for, tick in the box exercise where the donors can see that it's in the policy, but that they are implemented and practiced as well.
That almost relates to a question that I'm toying with here as one that sort of pulls a few threads together, Rosie. Looking at the working paper, the review, what would you say are the greatest challenges that are facing higher education for its future engagement in climate change activity? What are the greatest challenges that higher education faces if it's going to do more, do better, take things further in ways like Lorena said, or that we've been discussing? Are there any big barriers there, or big issues?
I think the only biggest issue is the decolonization of the mindset of our academics, so that we just don't focus on conventional concepts and perception, but also look at what's working and see how we can tailor this in to our practices. Yeah, and I think we need more of us to be able to make that happen quickly. But yeah, it's happening, but it's happening at a slow rate. And I think with 7 years that we have, to reach 1.5 degrees, we don't have enough time for to change people's perception and get them to see that there are things that are working that we can do, but instead of just not questioning the status quo, going by with everything business as usual, and not realizing the impact of what will happen if we don't take action now.
And of course, the mindsets of the business community, the decision makers, the politicians.
Yes.
And so
Right.
on. 1.5 to stay alive, that slogan that people do remember.
Yes.
It's important for us all to remember that was introduced into the Paris Agreement discussions
Right.
by Caribbean small states.
And
That is a small
2030 is
state.
just around the corner.
Yeah, but that phrase is what I'm saying. That
Hmm.
phrase was introduced by small states into the global discussion, Caribbean.
Mm.
So Rosie, I don't
Yes.
know if you see Chris's reflection
Yes.
there about being in agreement here around academia. It's kind of, yeah, those discussions and how higher education can at times be part of the problem as
Yes.
well.
I
Changing
think so.
mindsets is difficult.
Right, because I think to some extent we are too busy researching to publish, to get a promotion, or to, and we live in this world that we forget that, you know, what we found is gold, and we have to take it back to implement so that, you know, we bring life to people and the communities. And that's why, you know, the participatory action research is really important for us, and a relevant research approach for us to use, because, you know, it reflects some of our traditional cultural values. For instance, the values of respect, the values of reciprocity, where we, you know, we exchange ideas for the benefit of both, you know, the researcher as well as the researched. And I think it's only relevant for us, you know, it's important for us to come back and give back, and not just, you know, bring and not give back to the communities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Palesa has her hand raised. Palesa, did you want to join in? Oh,
Yeah,
and live question.
yeah. Lorena. Firstly, a wonderful presentation, Rosie. Thank you so much. Always exciting to hear what Team Fiji are up to. So yeah, huge congratulations to you and your entire team. Thank you so much, Michael, for your inputs and your discussion. Also incredibly valuable. I would like to touch on the issue of Indigenous knowledge, you know, and there seems to be this kind of dichotomy, right, between Indigenous or traditional knowledge and the more scientific knowledge that is, you know, whatever, produced in order to respond to the climate crisis. Now, in relation to that, is there the concern, for instance, that Indigenous knowledge could become instrumentalized, you know, in the moment historically where Indigenous knowledge is applied in order to, whatever, make instrumental use of it for commercial gain? We've fallen into the trap of sort of reducing it to something commercializable or profitable, and kind of backgrounded its intrinsic value and the sorts of cultural goods that we derive from Indigenous knowledge. And you've touched on some of these in the case of Fiji. So given that kind of danger, are there ways in which this is being thought about in the Fiji case? What is the kind of way to work with Indigenous knowledge without being, without reducing it to a tool, you know?
Well, the good thing about traditional knowledge is not everyone has access to this knowledge. And there are three types of Indigenous knowledge. We have the open knowledge, the closed knowledge, and the negotiated knowledge. However, the one that's important for everyone to use, for example, the knowledge of weather forecasting is open knowledge, because, you know, everyone needs to be able to forecast and prepare for the changes that are, you know, that are approaching. So one of the things, I think a couple of years back, there have been some writing in regards to IP intellectual property of not only knowledge but also art and so the good thing about our knowledge is they're protected knowledge, if used if not used wisely, it can, there are impacts for not using this knowledge in proper ways. So people really have to be careful about the use of indigenous knowledge. Yeah?
Thank you, Pelissa, for the question, and Rosie. We have 5 minutes left, so time maybe for one last question, if anyone has one. Or Rosie, if you had a reflection that you wanted to.
Yeah, just on the video, one of the impacts of the work that we're doing in relation to video is our work is seen around the world, and we've had universities contacting me to work with us, but in some cases they are asking for sister schools, and I'm really glad that that's happening, because USP can't do it all. So we've partnered these universities with other primary schools so that they can work with in relation to climate change, and I'm glad. I can't remember the university in the UK that's working with a primary school in the first capital of Fiji. So what they're doing is they're exchanging information through virtually. So the university have provided them with the resources that they can use so that they're able to exchange information on climate change. Yes, so those are some of the benefits of doing this this work, and also being a regional university. Our reach is more, further than just Fiji.
Great. Chris is saying thank you. Thank you, Chris, also for your contributions. It was really helpful. Tristan, would you want to come in and say?
Just one brief final question. Your work and the review has shown the extensive practice around sustainability in Fiji and the Pacific region, and the contributions to our understanding globally around research methodologies and indigenous knowledge and so forth. But it's also identified a lack of published research on climate change and higher education in Fiji. So what's your recommendation for the research field specifically? What should this generation and the next generation of researchers, what should they be looking at? What do they need to be researching and publishing?
Well, I think they need to research a lot on indigenous knowledge and integrating them with science, with Western science, because indigenous knowledge has its indigenous science as well, and how we can, integrate the two, not only in high education but also in lower education sector. I think it's important because as I mentioned earlier, this knowledge is relevant for people in the community. This knowledge is applicable. They are free. We don't have to pay to use this knowledge. We don't have to pay for resources, expensive resources, to be able to implement them. They've worked for a millennia, over thousands of years. They've been practiced and have been proven to have worked they are practical. So I think it's important that our young researchers go into this, because this is a niche, an area that hasn't been explored. I mean, we're just working on this is just the tip of the work on indigenous knowledge and climate change.
I could add a little bit to Tristan's question. So much good work has been done, even in this area in the Pacific, but not published in the international literature, because it's proved hard for Pacific scholars and academics to get their work published in the international journals and beyond the Pacific. And one response has often been to publish within the Pacific in their own journals or USP publication, University of the South Pacific publications, and so on. So there's an international element here as well. And I think Climate U is helping to tackle that by, I'm pleased to see the Climate U project publish this working paper, and it's helping to get Pacific research and Pacific voices and records of past Pacific research out into the international arena and into the international discourse. So that's part of the problem and part of the answer to Tristan's question there.
And I think more of collaborations is this will, help the work be more visible.
And Rosie, did you want to just mention the colleagues who were co-authors of this, give them a shout out?
Yes, and I hope they're joining us this evening. Actually, our team started off with 3 of us. So it was just me, Felipe, who's a research associate, and Apollosa, who's a practitioner with the work that we are doing. He's also a research associate. And then we brought in Dr. Lindua, who's an expert in language, to help us in children's book, as well as in the editing of our work. And then we have 2 other master's research students. One of them have graduated, Kolaya, and now earns himself another scholarship at La Trobe University in Melbourne. So he's left us, but he continues to work with us, as well as Malakai, who's currently with us, and I think we'll be losing him too soon. And I must say, this is because of the work that we are doing in Climate U. They've been recognized by other universities because the collaboration has allowed them to be able to be seen by other universities. And our other author is Siniva, who's also a PhD student at the university, who's writing on language and academic performance, students' academic performance. So yes, so thank you.
Shout out to the team, yes.
Yes, and good job, they say in America. But for the great work, and thank you so much, Professor Michael, for also. Well, he's our adjunct professor, and we're not really exploiting him enough. But I think that's what we need to do to grab the opportunity now. And yes, Professor Tristan and Charlie, who's not here, they're always there to support us. Sometimes I think our researchers give up, but we are glad that the continuous communication from our Climate U team in London encourages them, inspires them to go on. And publishing their work is again an inspiration to all of us. And thank you very much. Lorena.
Thank you all. No,
bless
thank
us.
you both. And thank you everyone for your questions. I'm conscious of the time. I think this is something clearly that we could talk about, and it's ongoing, and it's so, again, ongoing right now with COP27. So I think we have a lot of wonderful kind of material to draw from here. The conversation continues. Thank you again so much, everyone, for joining today. And we have our next event, which is a hybrid event, so in person in London and also online on the 18th of November. That's also highlighting some Climate U work. We're going to hopefully do some parallel sessions and then some reflections around COP. That's towards the end of COP, and seeing kind of the next direction. So thank you again all so much. We look forward to engaging with you again and seeing you at future events. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Michael.
Been a
Wishing
pleasure.
you all a wonderful rest of your day, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Happy to be
Thank you.
involved. Bye-bye, Rosie. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Lorna, Melissa, Tristan, and everyone.